Chapter 17. The Hidey Hole. The first time we heard gunfire, my parents told me that it was nothing. We read by lamplight in the basement and pretended to be pioneers. It would have worked if they weren't so scared. But I remember the fear, even though their features have faded from my memory. I pretended right along with them for Tina's sake. She was only 3, and I was the big brother after all. By the third night, gunfire had gotten closer. The sirens normally used to warn us of dangerous weather were going off, warning all citizens of Clinton of an imminent invasion. No one was pretending to be pioneers anymore. We were all just scared and edgy, and Mom and Dad insisted we sleep inside the cupboard nook behind the false front. There was a shelter in the basement that we had made for all 4 of us, with another hiding spot within the cupboard built inside, and a false back inside of that. It was so small that only Tina and I could fit, and it led into a crawl space that smelled of mildew and dust. We were able to drag blankets and pillows through with us, and Tina was terrified and cried herself to sleep huddled against me. With the cement walls of the basement above and all around us, we could hear very little from outside our little nest, and that night as Tina and I slept, the troops moved into the town and quickly began smashing through the houses street by street. I think they knew what would happen. I have such a hard time forgiving them, that they would die and we should live. What kind of a world was left for 2 small children to exist in all alone? David's journal. David woke first. His eyes snapped open. He had been dreaming it was Christmas morning with presents all around the tree. The dream had frayed away, disrupted by screams. Now he heard nothing. There were no screams, no murmurs, no guns or explosions, not even the crunch of the gravel road outside. Tina slept curled against him, her breath warm and moist. His shirt was damp at the spot where her face pressed against his chest. Normally, he would have shoved her away, called her a little baby, but at the moment he wasn't feeling so big himself. He felt small and alone. It was light out, he could see that much, but nothing else. He strained his ears to hear anything but the soft rhythm of Tina's breaths in, out, occasionally sighing as she slept, whining to herself. A bad dream? After several minutes he could hear the faint twitterings of a bird, the crackle of gunfire far, far away. Were Mom and Dad still sleeping? Tina's breathing barely changed as he carefully shifted her off of him, covering her with a warm blanket, like Mom always did, before he slipped away, back through the hidey hole, into the hidden room. The room was empty, the door was open, and he could see sky? David blinked, confused, and rubbed his eyes. Perhaps this was a dream. He stepped through the wreckage of fallen timbers, small mountains of furniture, mixed with plaster and wood and clothing. Open pipes dribbled water, and he realized his feet were wet. He stumbled forward, earning a great painful gash on his leg from a protruding board. The silence was terrifying, but hearing the noises he made reverberate through the mess of what had been his home was even more awful. His mind was devoid of any words to describe what he saw, or name the overwhelming dread he felt. Mom and Dad weren't in the room. His home was destroyed. He was completely alone. The boy stood and stared. His leg bled freely from the wound, but he took no notice, standing there, immobile, until he heard a high wail of fear behind him. He turned to see Tina's small tousled head peering from the false front cupboard. Her eyes were black holes of terror. She looked just as confused and shell-shocked as he must have, and her lower lip quivered. "Mommy," she wailed, ignoring David as he waded back to her and tried to help her out and up. "I want Mommy," she wailed again before he could shush her. He slapped a hand over her mouth. "Shh. We'll find Mom and Dad, but you gotta be quiet. The bad guys might still be here," he warned her. Although it seemed impossible that things could get worse, her eyes grew bigger at the thought. She quieted, screwing up her face at the dark mess of water, and clinging to her brother, wrapping her arms and legs around him. He lifted her up and tried to carry her, but the way was too cluttered, and he tripped, spilling them both into the dirty water and plaster that lay throughout the basement. To her credit, Tina made very little noise despite her skinned knees. Her world had changed far too much, and she was in the same state of shock that he was. By the time they managed to crawl and shove their way out of the debris to the other end of the basement, they were both filthy and wet. The stairs leading up were broken in several places, but enough of the staircase was intact for them to slowly climb up and out. Tina clung to her brother's back like a monkey and then silently followed him after he set her down and pushed through the remnants of their home. Slowly, both children exited through what had been the living room and into the backyard. It took just moments for the two children to find the lifeless bodies of their parents. They lay crumpled in the grass within feet of each other. Dad looked as if he had been trying to reach Mom. His arm was stretched out towards her. Their mother lay face up, eyes staring wide open and clouded. Dad was just an arm's length away on his stomach. David sat down abruptly on the grass next to his mother. He reached forward hesitantly and touched her. Her skin was cold, rubbery, and he felt his stomach flop and his hands shook as he reached over and closed her lifeless, staring eyes. Tina said nothing, just held his free hand and pressed her face into his shoulder. Her little body was shaking uncontrollably. He thought briefly that he should say something, tell her Mom and Dad were in heaven or something, but he couldn't make the words come. Not any words. What can a 10-year-old child say to his baby sister of 3? Neither of them had words for the horror before them. It would be hours before they left the bodies of their parents, and then it was only because of the gnawing pain in their stomachs. Life rudely continues on in the face of death, and bodies still need nourishment. David dug through the wreckage until he found a snack pack of fruit cocktail, the kind with the pull-top lids. They both ate ravenously, avoiding the sharp rim as they dipped their fingers in for the last little specks of syrup. Tina stared up at him, absently licking a dribble of fruit cocktail syrup from the corner of her mouth. "I'll find us more food in a little while," he told her, and walked over to the shed in the corner of the property. It was still intact, rather incongruous when you looked at all of the devastated houses around it. On the outside of the door hung a shovel, and David took it down from its hook and walked back to where his parents lay. Digging a hole deep enough for both of them was amazingly hard. David dug, and the patch widened and deepened until it was a few feet across and maybe half a foot in depth. His hands, back, and shoulders hurt, and he was dirty and horribly hungry. Tina had refused to leave his side and sat clinging to his leg, slowing his movements and exhausting him further. He stopped, rubbed his hands, and straightened his back. Behind him, Tina sucked on her thumb noisily and whimpered for food. "Come on, Teen." He took her hand in his. "I'll find you something to eat." They trudged past the remains of their home and on to the Connors, who lived down the street. The Connors had left a week ago, headed east towards family in Illinois, and Mr. Connor had come by and told Mom and Dad to help themselves to whatever they left behind. Most of it was probably still there, in the hand-dug bomb shelter hidden behind shelves of books. It was a survival cache that they didn't have room to take with them when they ran when news of the advancing troops had spread. The bomb shelter had been raided. The shelves of books that Mrs. Connor loved so much had been tossed willy-nilly to the ground, but no one had discovered the cache of foods concealed behind the bookshelves. David found canned meats, vegetables, ready-to-eat soups, even canned milk. A trip through the Connors' ruined house also yielded a hand-operated can opener. David wrestled with it, opening a can of milk and one of the soups, and greedily sucked down his share of both before his sister could have a chance to eat. The look on her face made him feel awful. Her lip trembled, and he patted her hair clumsily and made sure she ate the rest of the soup and milk. "Sorry, Teen, I was awful hungry. Hey, look, there's some of Ms. Connor's homemade strawberry jam. You want some?" Tina perked up, and minutes later was happily sucking strawberry jam off her fingers as David led her to a broken and dripping water pipe to wash up. Tina's fine blonde hair would soon become matted beyond all hope of redemption. David did his best to keep his sister's hands and face clean, but the rest of her took on a grayish, grimy appearance in the days, weeks, and finally months that followed. In the end, it had taken 2 full days to dig the single grave deep enough to bury their parents' bodies in, and a full week for the blisters to heal. The stock of canned food at the Connors had eventually run out. David expanded his searches to the other ruined houses around them. Twice they had hidden from troops marching through the area. The uniforms were different, but a stranger was a stranger, and the children were too frightened to test the foreign soldiers' kindness. The men strode through the ruined stretches of houses, their machine guns hanging from their shoulders, searching for loot, for food or clean water or anything else they took a fancy to. They robbed the dead, shot at any stray animal unfortunate enough to cross their paths, and drank bottles of alcohol. David had read the labels of the empty bottles discarded at their campsites, before finally moving south towards more populated areas. Spring had turned to high summer, but their hidey hole stayed relatively cool. David made sure that they both drank from the broken water pipes and not the pond or the brackish water that collected in the drainage ditches. Only once had they made that mistake, and Tina had gotten so sick he was afraid she would die. She had run a fever, hot to the touch and glassy eyes for 2 days before slowly getting better. When the water pipes slowed to a trickle and finally petered out, David searched for new ones with Tina following silently behind wherever he went. There was a pattern to the days now. Each morning he would wake first, and then shake his sister awake. He would turn his back while she used the overflowing, stinking toilet in the house down the street, and take her to the nearest water source and make sure she washed her face and hands. They would eat canned food for breakfast, wash again, and scout for supplies. They took it street by street, fanning out in ever-widening circles. The walks were taking longer and longer, and often they would stop at a familiar shelter and sleep for a while with the sun burning hot overhead. Tina was still little, so she needed more sleep, and David found it easy to nod off with his sister cuddled against him, even on the hottest day, her little body moist and heavy. Later, they would take what they had found and head back to the hidey hole for dinner and to sleep. Sleep came with the setting sun. The few candles they had found were precious, and the flashlights and batteries even more so by the time the darkness fell completely, the 2 children were already well snuggled into their nest, lying close to each other for comfort. If their parents could see them now, David mused one night, they would both be smiling in surprise and pride at how good he was being with Tina. The only time they argued had been over what to eat, pickles or olives, for dinner one night. Other than that, he had been the best big brother he could be, better than his parents would have ever dreamed. Tina whimpered suddenly in her sleep, and he pulled her closer and patted her matted hair until her breathing evened and her body relaxed once again.